Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's a wonderful turnout, and I'm very happy to be here to provide some of the local context in this series on Kingston's nursing history. So I'd like to thank the Museum of Healthcare for organizing this and the St. Joseph's School of Nursing Nurses Alumni for asking me to speak, and for Brigitte for traveling to Kingston and sharing her knowledge. And I think there's some great links between our two papers. You'll see some similar images, perhaps, but she really set the context for what I'm going to be speaking about for the next few minutes. My aim is to examine the origin and early history of the school, focusing on its founding and growth over the first decade and a half of its existence. The story of the school really begins in 17th century France. The religious hospitallers of St. Joseph were founded in a town in the Loire Valley called La Flèche in 1636. A tax collector named Jérôme Leroy de la Devassière received visions in which God instructed him to found a congregation of hospitaller sisters, build a hospital in La Flèche, and to found a colony in New France on the island of Montreal, establishing a hospital there as well. The Daughters of St. Joseph, as they were initially known, were founded on May 18, 1636, founded by Jérôme Leroy along with Marie de la Ferre, the co-foundress and first superior. In the spring of 1641, Jérôme Leroy met Jeanne of Langres, the daughter of the magistrate who wished to become a missionary in New France, and she became part of a group which would travel across the Atlantic with the military office, Paul Chaumaudet de Maisonneuve, and the 50 colonists arrived in Montreal, establishing Ville Marie May 17, 1642. In 1645, the first hospital was built, a stone building known as Miss Mance's house. And Jeanne Mance is credited as being the first lay nurse in North America, as Brigitte explained. She would subsequently serve as the inspiration for nurses of the St. Joseph School of Nursing. In June of 1659, the first three daughters of St. Joseph left France to tend to the sick of Ville Marie in their Hotel Dieu. By the mid-19th century, the RHSJs and the Hotel Dieu de Montréal was well enough established to respond to the call by the Bishop of Kingston, Remigius Gaulin, to provide sisters to establish the community in his Upper Canadian city. The second bishop of Kingston saw that the poor sick in his city, including many Irish immigrants, were uncared for. He wrote to Bishop Bourget of Montreal in 1841, requesting that he allow the religious hospitallers of St. Joseph, Montreal, to send sisters to care for the poor, the sick, and the needy in Kingston. Bishop Bourget approached the RHSJs and asked for their assistance. With Kingston serving as the capital of Canada in 1841, adequate housing for the RHSJs in the hospitals could not be found. Sister Amable Bourbonniere, who had been voted the superior of the Kingston community, was unable to found her new hospital for 4 years. In 1845, the Ecclesiastical Corporation purchased two 1/5 of an acre lots on the north side of Brock Street, each with a limestone house, along with the outbuildings, in trust for the hospital and orphan asylum. Sister Bourbonniere and the foundress and first superior, along with three sisters, traveled by steamer dressed in secular clothing on September 1st, 1845. On September 4th, they moved into their new home, and on the 7th, they saw their first patient. The RHSJs quickly ran out of space in these two small limestone buildings and needed to expand their hospital. 1847, a large extension was built on the hospital, and the following year, a building was constructed in between the monastery and the hospital. And in 1869, a large building later known as the Brock Street Apartments was built, again needing to expand. In 1892, the sisters acquired the former Regiopolis College on Sydenham Street. After its opening and an extensive renovation, the hospital was described as, quote, being the most commodious and modernized hospitals that can be found on the continent. By the end of the 19th century, the sisters added a chapel, built a monastery, and added a modern surgical theater. In late 1909, construction was begun on the first extension, the five-story Brock Street wing. The continued expansion was necessary as the needs of the Kingston community was growing rapidly. Between 1845 and 1910, the Hotel Dieu treated approximately 35,000 patients. In the next decade, from 1910 to 1920, an extraordinary 19,906 patients were admitted. From its founding in 1845 and into the 20th century, the Hotel Dieu hospital nursing staff was comprised exclusively of sisters. Initially, this was sufficient, as the community grew in size from the founding 4 sisters to 17 by the time the last building on Brock Street was completed. When the RHSJs moved into Regiopolis College, the community contained 34 sisters, including novices, postulants, and by 1911 there were 48 Kingston RHSJs. Not all of them, however, would be nursing sisters. Some would be in administration. Some would be undergoing formation as novices and postulants, and some would be retired from work and life. As the hospital expanded, it became apparent that it was not sufficient for the sisters on their own to meet the demand of the public. In the Annals for the Community, the author writes, quote, "The hospital being nearly always filled with patients, night and day, duty constant and arduous, our community thought it wise to organize a training school for nurses, as the sisters were becoming weakened by their excessive labors." Teaching nursing to young women was a familiar concept to the RHSJs. The Kingston sisters employed the centuries-old tradition of patient care that was imported from France via Montreal to provide hands-on training to sisters with experienced individuals teaching novices on the wards. Their education became increasingly formalized, with sisters undertaking a 3-year course of study, attending lectures given by doctors, and working under supervision in all different hospital departments, at the end of which they received a diploma. I don't have an early diploma. The first one we have is Sister Margaret Quilty's from 1917. By the time the religious hospitals of St. Joseph in Kingston began planning their school, 3 other RHSJ hospitals were already operating training schools. The Hotel Dieu Hospital in Montreal opened its lay training school in 1901. Chicago's St. Bernard Hospital was founded in 1906. And the Windsor Hotel Dieu founded theirs the following year. The superior of the Hotel Dieu Kingston, Sister Teresa Ferre, charged Sister St. Charles, Louise O'Connor, with the responsibility of establishing a training school. Sister St. Charles, who had previously studied with the Loretta Nuns of Toronto prior to entering the Hotel Dieu in 1897, went into Chicago to learn how to administer a nursing school from Sister St. Bernard Elizabeth Woods, who trained herself under the Sisters of St. Mercy in Philadelphia. Sister St. Charles arrived in Chicago on June 8, 1912. It's not certain how long she remained at St. Bernard, but by the end of the year she was back in Kingston, briefly putting into place what she learned in Chicago. Her tenure as director of the School of Nursing was short-lived, as she was called to serve as a superior of the Hotel Dieu Windsor beginning September 1st, 1914. Miss Alice Donaghy, a graduate of St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, was hired to replace Sister St. Charles as the director of the St. Joseph's Training School for Nurses. In September of 1913, the school became fully operational with the entrance of the first class of first-year students. The first 2 students of the school had actually began their training prior to Sister St. Charles' trip to Chicago, and the subsequent official founding of the school. Anne and Jeanette Legree, sisters from Cornwall, started their training at the Hotel Dieu sometime in 1911, most likely following the system used to train the sisters. In 1913, they were joined in their 3rd year by Betty Carlin, who had completed 2 years of training at St. Vincent de Paul School in Brockville. These 3 would complete their last year of training under Miss Donaghy, and on August 31st, 1914, they received their diplomas from the Archbishop, becoming the first graduates of the training school. Miss Donaghy would only serve 1 year as director. One source that she remarks that she left for another position, despite the students signing a petition that she remained. The Sisters' Annal states, "We have dispensed with our paid superintendent, one of our sisters being competent to conduct the school." That competent individual was Sister St. James, who oversaw the last 2 years of training of 6 nurses who entered in their first year in 1913, and the following class as well. Young women who wish to enter the training school need not be Catholic. Young women who wish to enter the training school need not be Catholic, but they were required to be, quote, of good moral character. They were to have at least 1 year of high school education prior to admission, as, quote, a nurse's duty are most exacting, demanding intelligence. Therefore, in accepting candidates, preference will be given to women with superior education. Applicants needed to be in good health, must be between the ages of 21 and 35. Around 1930, this was changed, and applicants between the age of 18 and 30 were preferred. Above all, they were, quote, expected to comply with the requirements and ideals of the school, end quote. The training room classroom was located at the east end of the 1909 Brock Street wing. Most of the teaching, however, occurred on the wards, where student nurses were taught nursing arts by the director and floor supervisors at the bedside. There was plenty of opportunity for learning, as students were required to work 12-hour shifts with 1 hour off during the day, 6.5 days a week, and they had 2 weeks of holiday a year. As Paul Robertson notes in his study of Kingston nursing schools, this demanding schedule was devised as student nurses provided the hospital with its primary workforce, and as a result, the organization... As a result, the organization and operation of a hospital training school was directed more by the demands of the nursing service than by the educational needs of the student. Training, room and board were provided in lieu of financial compensation for this work. In order to gain specialized skills which they could not acquire at the Hotel Dieu, the school affiliated itself over the years with different institutions, including the Mowat Sanatorium, the Isolation Hospital attached to KGH, and the Children's Memorial Hospital of Montreal. They served 2 or 3 periods at these institutions during their course of study. Doctors gave lectures during their supper hour after they had finished their rounds, or at 7 p.m. when the nurse's day shift was over. Topics included surgery, bandaging and massage, materia medica, which is modern-day pharmacology, obstetrics, gynecology, diseases and treatment of the ear, eyes, nose, and throat, bacteriology, hygiene and physiology, anatomy and anesthetics, and later ethics and religious and moral ethics. Excuse me. The curriculum was not standardized until 1926, following the Registration Act, which was introduced in 1922, requiring graduates to pass a provincial exam. Between 1922 and 1925, a waiver of the examination was provided as the registration process was being developed, as long as a $10 fee was paid. The class of 1926 was the first to take the provincial registration exams. Sister St. James, the former training school director, was appointed to the newly created position of instructress of nurses, and in 1926 she, along with Chief of Staff Dr. J.P. Quigley, instituted an academic timetable which met the minimum curriculum standards set out by the Department of Health. In the subsequent decade, more time would be spent in the classroom, and the time working on wards would be decreased slightly. When not working in class or working a 12-hour shift in the hospital, the students would have spent a considerable amount of time in their residence. Curfew was 10 p.m. Until 1918, there was no separate residence building. The nurses lived in the ground floor of the Sydenham wing of the hospital, where there was a dormitory with 10 beds, a dining room, a kitchenette, and a recreation room with a piano. As the number of students increased, better and larger accommodation required, so the 1869 wing of the old Hotel Dieu was renovated to become the nurses' home. This building was soon too grown out of, so construction of a purpose-built residence was begun in April of 1923. By October, the first stage of the residence, 3 floors, located behind the chapel of the hospital, was complete. At the official opening, it was described as, quote, spacious and comfortable, and so long needed. And the visitors who toured the building were, quote, very pleased with everything about it. The building was completed in 1926 with the addition of 2 more stories. The residence could now house 50 nurses and included offices, a library, a large auditorium, and a large auditorium on the lower level. I don't know if you can see, but there's a nurses, I guess it's fairly big, students' room, dining room, and recreational area. The building would serve as the nurses' home until construction began on the Jean Mont's residence in 1948. The St. Joseph Training School for Nurses, which became the St. Joseph School of Nursing in the early 1930s, continued to expand over the years. Enrollment went from 8 in 1913 to 83 in 1945, and that's the complete student body. And classes continued to grow, the largest being the class of 1970, which graduated 57 nurses. In total, nearly 1,700 nurses graduated from the school in its 62 years of existence. From its small beginning 100 years ago, the cloistered RHSJ sisters shared their Catholic tradition of care through the graduates of the St. Joseph School of Nursing, far beyond the confines of the Hotel Dieu Hospital, a legacy which continues with the nursing alumni.